there are a lot of films that are popular that I don't enjoy, but I didn't expect Zodiac to be one of those. It's got all of the hallmarks of everything I love from a crime drama, but sadly, the narrative was a mess. There are a lot of things I do like about this. There were a lot of things that I think deserve praise, but because I'm narrative driven and I like a juicy narrative that's going to keep me engaged and that's well told and well developed, it just didn't work for me. Obviously, because this is based on the true story of the Zodiac killer. And I will kind of go into a little bit about that in more detail in a moment. I can't say that the narrative itself was poor. And certainly it isn't. When I read the description from IMDb, it sounds absolutely thrilling, and it could have been so amazing if it was executed correctly and well with the right pacing, but it's so messy and the emotions aren't there. I never felt like I was on the edge of my seat waiting to see who we'd kill next or if the next code would be deciphered. I was really disengaged. It did not appeal at all. So, the description from IMDb is as follows. In the late 1960s, early 1970s, a San Francisco cartoonist becomes an amateur detective obsessed with tracking down the Zodiac killer, an unidentified individual who terrorized Northern California with a killing spree. Now, I'm not going to actually say anything about this crime in any detail. This is based on truth, but in case you have never heard of this, I don't want to go into too much detail about anything that may spoil the narrative for you, because there are parts of the narrative that are interesting. I have to say there are some killings that were very brutal to watch, but it's never that gory. It doesn't really go that deep into it, and I think that's maybe one of the reasons why I was lacking in any emotive response, because there was one killing, I don't want to say too much, but I think it was maybe the first killing, if I remember, and it was a man and a woman beside each other, and they were lying down with their hands tied behind their backs, and I thought, this is about to turn brutal, but it cuts away really quickly, and I'm not saying the film has to shed blood everywhere to be engaging, but there was no real sense of loss for the victims, and yes, obviously, it's told through the eyes of Graysmith, Robert Graysmith, played by Jake Gyllenhaal. He does a fantastic job, brilliantly acted. But at the same time, I never felt any urgency in the narrative. I liked his scenes, but they weren't very heated. There wasn't really much of an urgency. And that's not down to his acting, it's definitely down to the narrative and where the focus was, which characters are involved at certain times. I just felt like they didn't really hit many of the nails on the head. In terms of the codes, obviously it's going to be quite complicated because these are cryptic messages and you're not meant to be able to just look at it and understand it. That's the whole point. That's the Zodiac killer's MO. And I do think it kind of slightly explained what he was doing, but there are a lot of stuff in this that I feel was glossed over or rushed over. The pacing is a problem with this. The focus for me is not in the right places. And I don't feel like if you've never heard of the Zodiac killer that this will give you a full, well-rounded look at what this case was about. I absolutely do not. Maybe from Graysmith's perspective, yes. It is admittedly based on his book, and I would like to read that. But considering it's also very much about the Zodiac killer, I don't think it's not the best starting point if you've never heard of the Zodiac killer. Would I recommend this film? It's difficult because there were bits of it that I liked, and there were bits that I think worked well. I think Gyllenhaal was brilliantly cast, very well acted. We have Mark Ruffalo, Robert Downey Jr. It's got a very good cast, very strong cast. The directing, it's David Fincher. I expected great things, but there's nothing particularly about the directing that stood out. Some of the camera angles during some of the killings were not the best they could have been. They could have been re-angled to be more emotive. There are a couple of victims we see who we could have got a lot more involvement with and kind of felt more for them so that we were more determined to, I guess, help Graysmith solve the puzzles, because at the end of the day, that's why we watch these films. We watch them to try and unravel the mystery. And I just don't think there was any emotion in this film at all. the narrative was all over the place. The focus was in the wrong location. It is long. That doesn't bother me. I'm not the biggest fan of long films. It's about 2.5 hours. But with a crime thriller like this, the longer for me, the better. When it's done well, and this is not done well. 7.7 out of 10 on IMDb is absolutely insane. I don't know how it got that score at all. I'd give it a 5.5. Overall 5.5, I'll give it a 6.5 for the acting. The lighting wasn't great, the directing wasn't great, the editing, most of the scenes transitioned nicely into one another, but the camera angles were just not great. There are a lot of things about this film that could have been a lot better. I'd love to see this tackled again by somebody who's prepared to put the emotional aspect into it and to make it not so messy, because it's all over the place and it doesn't really know what it's trying to do. Not the worst film I've seen, but a massive disappointment.